We got to talk about the Trump-Putin call bombshell. I mean, whoa. Jesus Christ. After so much of we gotta stop taking all this stuff and giving it to the foreigners and to the Ukrainians, and we need to spend all of these artillery shells at home, firing them at hurricanes, whatever the fuck they thought we would have done with these munitions during these natural disasters. After so much of that, to hear that their daddy, their America First daddy, picked Vladimir Putin over the pensioners of Mississippi when it comes to who gets a COVID test first. The person who deserves to die versus the people that he's, employed to protect. My gosh, it's something, ain't it? America first, unless it's a dictator. It's just mind-boggling. There's no defense. There's zero defense. If half of what is in this upcoming Bob Woodward book is true, oh my goodness. And it's not just, let me be clear, the report is not just on Trump. There's reports on Biden and things he said around the Middle East conflict, different Middle East conflicts, but especially the Israeli invasion of Gaza. We've got other reports about what Biden has said around Obama and his legacy around Ukraine, which seems to be Biden blaming Obama for the situation we find ourselves in today. But the thing that is just more groundbreaking to me is the idea that he would legitimately pick Putin's personal health over getting these things to Americans first. And for what reason? And Putin warns him about it. Putin warns him about it in the messaging. Putin says, don't tell anybody about this. And Trump responds, yeah, sure. And then Putin immediately says, no, you don't get it. I'm telling you not to tell people about this, not for me. It's for you. You do realize that if people find out that you sent me COVID tests, that this is going to be bad for you. And for those of you who might be confused as to why Putin would want a COVID test, Putin has a long history of being a pretty big germaphobe. I mean, if you're a 72-year-old man, I would expect you to be a germaphobe generally just to be in protection of your own health. That seems to be kind of smart, but he's always been a germaphobe. As he gets older, it makes sense that he's even more of a germaphobe. And in Russia, they did not have the same healthcare infrastructure or the production capacity to make good, efficient vaccines. And we dumped a ton of money to research it very quickly. And he wanted a American COVID test. And so that's what he got. He got an American COVID test. And we sent him this. Okay, we could just get straight into it. So Bob Woodward, Pulitzer Prize winning American journalist who has published books before on the Trump administration. It's one of the few books I actually purchased that were made about the Trump administration because most of them are not necessarily that good. His was actually quite in depth. I recommend you go read it. He's now going to be releasing another book, which goes in government documents, phone call transcripts, and conversations in private, both during the Biden administration and the Trump administration, and some period following the Trump administration, to show some internal dynamics that we haven't seen before. Now, the big story that we're going to talk about has to do around Trump and the nearly seven reported phone calls that he had with Vladimir Putin after being president of the United States. So these are phone calls that he was not doing as president of the United States, but phone calls he was having with Vladimir Putin post-presidency as a private citizen. That's the bombshell. And the transcript that somehow, I do not know how, and I doubt Bob Woodward's going to share, and I know there's going to be some amount of like, well, Bob Woodward, I'm sure, he didn't show the actual immediate documents to everybody, so I'm sure these are all just completely fabricated. And the Trump campaign has already come out with a statement like saying this is all lies, it's all made up, this is basically toilet paper, this is not a book, this is going to go into the bargain bin. And you think I'm exaggerating, but we will play you the statement from Trump's campaign spokesperson, the same psychopath who responded to their national Arlington cemetery fiasco by lashing out. He did the same thing in response to this, and we're going to read that in a second. But Bob Woodward is a pretty respected, well-known, credible journalist. He's not somebody who would, I would imagine, make up an entire book of quotes and say that he has transcripts and the documents to prove it while not having it. That doesn't sound like something he would do. I mean, it's not impossible, but good luck proving it. So Bob Woodward has released all of this information, and we're going to throw first the stuff that's, I think, smaller but interesting, and I still want to list it, and then we'll get to the big stuff. So let's start with Biden before we move over to Trump. So a lot of this has to do with internal conversations in the Biden administration around negotiations between Israel and Palestine, but also a little bit on Ukraine. And there was one passage that I wanted to get through before we move over to the Israel-Palestine statement, before we move over to Trump. And that is this back and forth that Biden had with staff over Obama's role in the invasion of Ukraine in 2014. Let me read you this. Ahead of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Biden complained that Obama didn't do enough to stop Putin in 2014 when the Russian leader invaded Crimea. They effed up in 2014, Biden said to a friend, according to Woodward. That's why we are here. We effed it up. Barack never took Putin seriously. Now, if you guys remember the 2012 presidential debates, this is pretty famous moment during the debates. It was kind of seen as a slam dunk on Mitt Romney. And it was Mitt Romney talking about the biggest adversaries of the United States. And one of the adversaries he listed was the Russian Federation. Now, mind you, this was in 2012, right? So this was post-invasion of Georgia. I mean, the invasion of Chechnya as well in the rearview mirror. And Putin's authoritarian tendencies, while they hadn't gone to its, I guess you could say, deepest lows, with the raids on certain bars and the jailing of all opposition, assassination and targeting of political opposition, suppression of the press. This was all stuff that was already occurring. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a big adversary of the United States. There's many anti-freedom activists, we'll just say that, around the world that somehow wiggle themselves into a position where they're friends of the United States, or they're in, for example, like Salazar, a useful strategic position where America can overlook democratic shortcomings, to put it lightly, in order to work with them. We're talking about somebody who was invading Georgia, somebody who was still, rebuilding his influence in the former Soviet Union, was fostering corruption. It wasn't like this was unknown. It was more viewed as they're lashing out post-collapse. They're flex a little bit, but that's what they have to do to keep up illusions. The invasion of Georgia, it was bad, it was not good or whatever, but what could we have done? I mean, you could examine the fact that it was around election time and how that could have affected it, but his policy was very much downplaying the threat Russia posed in Europe. The idea that they would invade Ukraine was probably not the top issue on, Obama's mind. After the invasion of Georgia, that should have set off warning signs. And we know from the Orange Revolution, and we know from what the Russian nationalist elite and what Putin had been saying for a while, that he was meddling within Ukrainian internal affairs. He believed that Ukraine had these deep ties, but his rhetoric only increased and increased and got worse and worse and worse as time went on. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, Obama. He ignored it. Now, someone could say that, well, Putin's rhetoric wasn't that bad. That's true, but it also depends on what rhetoric to what audience you're looking at. It is true that it got worse in recent years, but there were warning signs. The invasion of Georgia, of course, the two invasions of Chechnya. There was internal meddling that was well known into Ukraine before that point. And there, of course, was the Russian threats to invade Ukraine, post-Soviet collapse in reference to nuclear weapons, and the treaties that they signed that Obama, once the invasion did happen, did not, I think, properly hold up. Of course, that treaty in the Budapest Memorandum did not say exactly what support had to be provided to Ukraine once it gave up its nuclear weapons to the Russians. Many of those missiles, by the way, and delivery systems have now been turned on the Ukrainians. But I think in spirit, it should have been a lot more forthright. It should have been a lot more strong. It should have been a lot more, resistant, to the point where the Russians would say, okay, we took Crimea, but maybe we have to give it back. We negotiate. Well, now we're in a good position to negotiate. Or, well, maybe we can't go any further. No, it was first Crimea. It was then Donetsk. It was then Luhansk. They tried in Odessa but failed. They tried in Kharkiv but failed. And then there was a war for years and years and years that the Russians just denied was happening the entire time. And Obama basically ignored the situation. He didn't completely ignore it. He sent some support. There was Minsk 1, there was Minsk 2. But he did everything to ignore the fact that the military strengthening of Ukraine with offensive weapons and capability so that it could be negotiating for a position of strength than just a position of good intentions, which seemed to be the Obama policy, could actually build resistance to the Russians. I think he was incredibly naive on the matter. And so when you look back at the Mitt Romney speech and the Mitt Romney confrontation of of Mitt Romney saying that Russia was one of our biggest opponents, getting the response, which it did at the time, of, oh, the Cold War needs its foreign policy back. It just stings. It just feels so bad in retrospect. And I mean, he's right. I think he's right. It's not completely Obama's fault, obviously, because other politicians compounded the problem. Trump didn't do anything to solve it. The delaying of aid to Ukraine, certainly, in order to get information on his opponent's, his prospective political opponent's son, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. That did not send the signal of, I will support Ukraine till the end. It sent the signal of, I will support Ukraine as long as it's beneficial to me. And I don't think that Donald Trump's statements since leaving office has particularly been much of a deterrent either. That's not to say that's the only problem that with our policy in Eastern Europe, our policy in Ukraine, but it's the same. It seems to be a same consistent problem of not showing rock solid support. Then the Russians invade. And then not only were they not expecting the resistance they got in Ukraine, they thought it was going to be over quick. They probably weren't expecting the amount of support that Ukraine got from the West, probably because they thought the war was going to be very quick and that it wouldn't even be up to us if we could get that support there in time. Anyway, though, they didn't expect that resistance. And maybe if they did, maybe the war wouldn't have happened in the first place, or it's the expansion of the war. It's impossible to say. I don't want to speculate. I don't like to get in speculation town of, oh, maybe if we did this and then this and then this, because you never know where we're going to end up, and there's so many factors you just can't consider. But Obama's lack of resistance in 2014 and then the lack of resistance that followed in the years to come, before we finally, under the Trump administration, sent aid that could actually go boom, because everything before that point was like, oh, this is a radar that'll show you where the bombs are coming from. Oh, that's very useful. We can get bombed in HD now. Thank you. But that's not what you use to win a war. It means nothing if you don't have an explosive capacity. And Obama, along with many other senators, were big champions during the early 2000s of destroying the Ukraine's post-Soviet arsenal of large quantities of it. And in the lead up to the invasion, there were many artillery crews that were involved in the destruction of that arsenal. That's not to say that this was like some deep plot from Barack Obama to destroy Ukraine from within. A lot of it just had to do with arms control programs after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Notoriously corrupt, I'm just going to be blunt here, notoriously corrupt country, tons of arms, underpaid soldiers and generals, criminal underworld that would want those things. I mean, everybody's seen that movie with Nicolas Cage. You get the idea. And so there was a concern around that. And so there's a policy reason that was done. But when you look at all of this one after the other, it seems like naive mistake after naive mistake after naive mistake about not only the Russian intentions, but what the Ukrainians could do with the tools that we were now, that the tools that they had, or with just prospective semi-American support on a piece of paper that ended up not meaning all that much at the end of the day. That's, the Budapest Memorandum. I'm kind of rambling now, but it's weird to hear this said in actuality from Biden, when I was wondering for years if there was others in the administration that felt it at the time. And this doesn't mean that Biden felt it at the time. This could be just Biden post fact, like being like, at the time I was very against. That's possible. But now we have it on the record, thanks to Bob Woodward. And this isn't the only thing. There's other statements from Biden on Netanyahu, which are generally similar to this, of saying he's a bad guy. I don't like him. I don't like that Netanyahu. There's even some arguments with Bibi. This is probably one of the strongest one. He's an effing liar. And generally a lot more verbal condemnation, and maybe you could even call it semi-venom or just vitriol from Biden directed towards Netanyahu in private in comparison to what has been said in public. He's always been publicly, at least since he's been president of the United States, at least semi-critical of Netanyahu when it comes to the judicial reforms that's been going on in this country. But this is definitely a little bit further. I remember reading about Private Biden as VP being a lot more cussy and a lot more, off the cuff. But he seems to be cussing a lot more. Maybe it's, when you get older, it's kind of harder to hold back those types of terminologies. If something happens, you just don't have that filter in the same way. And that's something I think both Trump and Biden are going through. That doesn't necessarily affect either way, their ability to rule or manage things, but it can affect your ability to maybe be a figurehead. Then again, this was said in private, so it is what it is. Okay, now that we've gotten through that, there's some other stuff you can go look at. Go read what's been published already. Of course, when the book comes out, you can read the book. Let's talk about what I think is the real bombshell part of this, okay? Let's talk about what's really hitting hard here. So, according to the Woodward book, and this is the stuff that interests me the most, not the Obama rambling. I hadn't prepared anything, so it was just kind of rapid firing. This is the thing that interests me the most about this, because I already knew Obama failed on Russia. we all knew that already. It's just good to know that they know it, so they can try to adjust course for the future. Trump supposedly, after leaving office, so this is him as a private citizen, not as a representative of the United States, just doing his functions, talking to the other countries with big bombs that could blow up the world. So, you have to talk to them and, be diplomatic to a certain extent so you can keep world stability, etc. No, as a private citizen, no longer associated with the executive branch in any manner post 2021. So we're talking about within the last 3 years, he had roughly 7 calls with Vladimir Putin. 7 calls. Now, 7 calls is quite a lot. I mean, that means he's calling him multiple times a year. And no matter how you distribute it, when you think about it, just on his face, not even talking about what's being discussed, let's say you distributed it evenly. So you're talking about he's having a call with Putin 2 to 3 times every year to talk about what? Why would you have those many calls in 2023? I mean, that's like a full year before the election. Why would you be having those calls in 2022? At the start of the invasion, did he think he was going to call him and like convince him out of it in the middle of the night? And even if that was the case, why would you have a follow-up call? And let's say it was not all then. Maybe it was in 2024 as he's trying to negotiate or talk to him about being president again. I mean, 7 calls is a lot for 1 year. And that would mean a lot of conversation about what exactly? We don't have the full picture, but we have some of the picture. Not from the post-2021 conversations, no. That is still unclear. Trump has said before that Putin talked about his dream of invading Ukraine once over, in conversation. We don't know exactly what that looked like. He just kind of drops that casually. Trump drops a lot of little shells, bombshells like that, maybe bullet shells, bullet casings, I don't know, like that casually in conversation during debates and speeches every once in a while. But pre these 7 calls, which on its own doesn't necessarily mean anything when it comes to what the deal is going to be post-war or anything like that, because that's immediately where my head is going to, and we'll get to that in a second. Let me just describe the second part of this so we can break this down separately. The second part of this, besides the 7 phone calls, is COVID tests. C19 test. We'll call it C19 test because we're on YouTube and I want to be careful because I've been demonetized very brutally. So Trump was trying to distribute, as president of the United States, which makes sense, C19, medicine, we'll just call it medicine because, again, YouTube, and tests in order to get people tested for the virus so that they could try to contain the spread. So as much as we were hoping during the Trump administration, as he was, that the heat was just going to get rid of the C19, it didn't. And so he had to distribute the supplies. And there's already been a lot of reporting on a lot of the mismanagement when it came to the distribution of supplies. Try to listen to J.B. Pritzker talk about Trump's personal C19 slush fund. I mean, I'd call it a slush fund. We'd call it supply depot, supply that he pulled from. You go listen to J.B. Pritzker talk about it. He talked about the full story with Politico. It's fascinating. Or any of the other management, or the passing over of the C19 medicine without a distribution plan over to the next administration. Putting all that aside, the country had a lot of Americans who did not have tests, who did not have masks, and did not have the medicine necessary to reduce the risk of infection and make it so that if you do get infected, that the symptoms that you have are not brutal. It's no magic cure where no matter what, you're not going to get sick, but it would help bring down the symptoms if you do, which helps keep less people out of the ER room, less people out of the hospitals, which means less strain on the hospital staff, which were pushed to their limits. And that's not only bad for the hospital staff, but if a hospital is overflowing, that means the staff cannot give proper care or possibly even care period to everyone. And that could lead to higher fatality rates. That could lead to people having diseases or problems with their bodies develop that could have been treated sooner, reducing costs, reducing the effects on their, on their health, the negative effects on their health. So it has a negative effect on the health and well-being of the public, as well on the healthcare infrastructure on the country. Okay, so not having the masks, not having the protective equipment, not having the tests, not having everything that you need to try to contain the spread, negative effect on the healthcare system. That's bad too. And when you don't have the tests and you don't know that you're spreading and you don't contain that spread, that means you could go end up visiting elderly people who are going to be more susceptible to the symptoms, and then more likely to not only have severe symptoms and then further strain the system, but possibly die. And it's not just the elderly, people who are immunocompromised and otherwise. And so that means if you're, say, just a dad working a 9 to 5, running, let's say, your local store, and you're just a shopkeep, and then you don't have the test to check before you go visit your mother in a nursing home, or before you go take care of your mother if you can't afford a nursing home, and you're one of millions of Americans who still take care of their family at their home, that could have a negative effect on your family's health. These tests were in short supply. People needed the tests. The price of these tests were going up. Now, so we have a picture of why these tests, why the C19 medicine, why all these things are all important. Sorry I have to lay down that foundation, but we're living in 2024 and basic public health issues are always partisan now. Have you seen how people are talking about unpasteurized milk? Okay, I don't even want to get into that. Point is, though, that's the situation. Vladimir Putin, apparently, according to the Bob Woodward book, approaches Donald Trump and he talks to Trump in a call like saying, hey, I need like a test. I need a COVID test. And if you're kind of confused as to why Putin would be asking for COVID tests for personal use, mind you. So this is not, we want a COVID test to give to our state employees, or these are COVID tests for Putin. These are COVID tests for Putin's health. Quick side note, Putin's health is not the foreign policy priority of the United States. Making sure that Putin continues to walk around and, bomb countries for a little bit longer and invade Ukraine for a little bit longer and make sure that he can repress the freedom of the press and assassinate his political opponents for a little bit longer is not the foreign policy priority of the United States. But Putin asked for it because reportedly Putin is a big germaphobe. He's an old guy. Makes sense there to be a germaphobe. And as you get older, definitely somebody like him, you're going to do everything you can to try to preserve your health and preserve your life. And what does Donald Trump do when he's asked during a public health crisis when Americans did not have the supplies necessary, and he was telling J.B. Pritzker and others that he didn't have all the supplies they needed and was not giving them all the supplies they needed? You should go see how many states asked for supplies and how much they ended up getting at the time. At that point, he decided to give Vladimir Putin the COVID tests for personal use so he could look out for his own health. Vladimir Putin, that is. Now, we have a transcript of this. So before I talk about what this could mean, what this suggests, how it shows a lack of character during a crisis, let me see if I can give you the transcript back and forth here. Here it is from Putin. Please don't tell anybody you sent these to me. I don't care. Fine. No, I don't want you to tell anybody because people will get mad at you, not me. They don't care about me. Not only do we have Donald Trump talking about on audio, sending these testing machines over to Vladimir Putin for personal use of his close associates. Who knows where they ended up anyway? But we have Vladimir Putin seeing the writing on the wall about what this would mean if it got out to the public, that during 2020, during the height of the pandemic, Donald Trump decided to send these machines. Do you guys remember the ventilator shortages? Do you guys remember the mass shortages? You guys remember when he had all the shortages? During that crisis, to take that and send it over to Vladimir Putin. He sees the political writing on the wall. If you are painting your movement as America first, that you want to prioritize the United States. And so then when you talk about selling out your allies, you can justify it through, well, no. We're simply putting our own interests first. And so when I say things like they can do whatever the hell they want in reference to NATO, when Donald Trump lies about the European Union's contributions to Ukraine versus America's contributions to try to have an excuse about why to cut aid and support for Europe's defense, more accurately Ukraine's defense, but it is the largest country located entirely in continental Europe. He wants to pitch that. He wants to pitch, we're going to do 20% tariffs, totally not going to hurt the American consumer. It is. But we're doing it because America first. And we're going to make all these sacrifices on the world stage and make all these decisions because at the end of the day, we need to care about Americans first. Now, I don't understand why you can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. But it's hard to pitch all of this, not only with the contradictory policy of what he wants to do in reference to support to Israel, but you can do all of this and say all of this and talk about all of this. But at the same time, when you're saying we've sent over too much aid, you're taking vitally needed public health resources and sending it over to Vladimir Putin for his use to protect his health? Why would we send help to Putin but not help to Illinois? Why would we send help to Putin before sending help to American citizens? This is the whole complaint I'm hearing about the kind of mythical stories we're hearing online right now about FEMA when it comes to the hurricane. And I don't even want to get into that topic right now because I don't want to divert. But you hear this all the time. Here's another iteration of this. I keep seeing people, like I think it's Tim Dillon and others, saying stuff like, oh, if only we had that Ukraine aid. If only we had that Ukraine aid. As if we had Patriot air defense systems, we could have shot down the hurricane out of the sky and we would have saved a day. Whoopsie doopsie. I'd be like, woohoo, yay, we're here. No. That's not how it works. Many of these systems, like the Hawk systems, have been sitting in storage facilities for 70 years. Like, they've been waiting and praying every night that they could shoot down Soviet targets, and they've given them the opportunity. Except it's kind of like Russian, Iranian Shahed drones, but still close enough, right? This isn't something you could have repurposed into aid to help people in North Carolina and Florida or in any of the communities affected. If you took the M113 troop carriers and you sent those to North Carolina, all you would have done is given people an iron box to drown in. You wouldn't have been giving them the support they need. And so when I hear this talk about instead of sending aid to Ukraine, send aid here, number one, it's a false dilemma. You can do both at the same time. Congress just needs to allocate the aid. Talk to Congress. I don't know why you think America can't do more things than one at the same. I was like, oh, we can only deal with housing. Okay, we can't deal with the drugs until we deal with housing. Oh, well, okay. Oh, well, then let's deal with the drugs and no, you can do multiple things at once. But on the other end of this is the exact like stereotype of what you imagine when they talk about this. Like we had these resources for Americans that needed it now, and instead we sent it to Ukraine because we care about Ukraine and defense contractors before everyone else. And this is an area where we're talking about American public health resources during a health pandemic where, you know, if there was a moment for America first, it would be at this point. And he's choosing Vladimir Putin first. He's choosing the dictator of a country that would then go on to invade Ukraine against the agreements we made with them, both at the end of the Cold War and within the Minsk Accords. Like, this is the opposite of everything that Trump was supposed to stand for as a movement when it comes to America first. I mean, there was already other, like, of course, you could say hypocritical examples of this in foreign policy where he flip-flops on this idea, the flip-flopping on Syria, of course, the complete undying support for Israel in every way, even when it might not be within America's interests and it could endanger troops in the region. There's other decisions you could point to and be like, this doesn't make sense from that perspective. This right here makes no sense from the America First perspective. It makes no sense from a public health perspective. It makes no sense from a perspective of caring about the United States first from I want America to do what. This entirely, to me, is Trump choosing his long record of personal relationships and building those, and those being that being the entirety of his experience when it comes to diplomacy, over the health of the American public. The public was not helped whatsoever by keeping Putin breathing. It has zero effect on the American public. Well, maybe it could have avoided a war, but it has zero effect otherwise on the American public. Why would he be choosing to give it to him? The only reason I could think of is that Donald Trump has always said that personal relationships and negotiations matter. And it's something that he concentrates quite a lot, and his staff says, and everybody who's left his administration says, he tries to foster direct relationships with people so he can try to like get things done smooth and quickly. You know, it's a businessman, it's the business thing. And we've read reports before about how this type of personal relationship has been used by Xi to play him on Taiwan, getting Trump to call back more and more American representatives on the island after Xi would call him and be like, I'm offended by this. I'm offended that so-and-so American diplomat or American businessman or American representative, some version, is on Taiwan. And then Trump would go to his staff and angrily be like, why do we have so-and-so on Taiwan? Why do we care about Taiwan? Why do we care about Taiwan and Hong Kong? And here's another example. In the middle of the night, being convinced by Erdogan to pull out of Turkey, he makes a decision in the middle of the night without consulting his advisors. He then consults his advisors, then switches that policy in the middle of the night. We constantly hear that he would be one of the, you know, the person in the last room is the one to influence Trump the most on some of these decision making, that sometimes you just got to be there to catch him. That's a report we heard. But that's already bad enough. When you combine that easy level of manipulation and getting rolled with somebody who prioritizes personal relationships, then you're going to have somebody who's chasing friendship over chasing America's interests, over chasing, you know, international security, or trying to stand up for our allies or credibility on the world stage. Or, as we see here, when push comes to shove and it's a question of the American public versus foreign dictator that Trump longingly wants to be like, he picks the foreign dictator. Nobody can look me in the face and tell me anything about America first ever again. Nobody can look me seriously in the face and tell me America first. Yeah, I believe America first. That's why I voted for the guy who chose to give testing machines to the Russians over American citizens. Stupid Shinji, thank you so much for the $2. And not just any Russians, not everyday Russians, Putin's regime. The Russians who would rather invest all of their money into war and war fighting and invading and conquering other countries rather than their public health services. And when I say that, I do mean that the economy in Russia right now, due to inflation and a lack of increases in funding for the healthcare sector, for infrastructure, each year, the Russians are putting less and less money into these services and more money into the war. And so Russia won't even take care of its own healthcare, and we're dumping our money into their healthcare when our Americans have enough issues as it is during a pandemic. America first. America first. America first. Well, actually, America second after Putin. Well, maybe third after Xi. Maybe fourth after Un? I don't know. Oh, fifth after Netanyahu. Sixth after Prince Salman. Oh, maybe seventh after the Qataris. Look, it's one thing if it was, hey, we're giving this we're going to ship, because there is something to be said about sending critical like aid to allies or to countries that, you know, need it during a crisis in order to build American soft power and relationships. And in the long run, you could make an argument that this is helpful for us. And even if it's difficult for us to make this call, these are surplus vaccines that we could use here, here, and here. There's an argument you could make. This isn't for the Russian public. This wasn't a like, hey, we've gotten a soft power victory where the Russians are like, wow, look at the power of American freedom. Look at how nice the Americans are. They gave us all these things. This was done in private for Putin for personal use. What's the foreign policy achievement? What's the foreign policy achievement? What's the goal here? What's the goal here? If not, you scratch your back, I scratch mine, or something along those I do a favor for you. We develop our friendship. I want you to respect. I'm trying to think of some explanation that doesn't just end with he just wanted Putin to like him, or it was a you scratch my back, I scratch yours situation. Like, I can understand if it was like you're trying to engage in diplomacy and he asks for like a type of tea bag that's difficult to get in Russia or something, you know, like a type of soda. Like if I was like, hey, you have to send me good Maryland blue crab cakes if you want me to continue to negotiate. It's like, whatever. These are valuable public healthcare resources that were just diverted to a dictator for what? And now we're hearing that post his presidency, he had 7 calls with Putin as a civilian. The same time that he's saying that he can end the war within 24 hours but won't specify what the deal is. You think you should trust this man with the codes again? You trust this man with all that power? My God. Okay, sure. People talk about Hillary Clinton selling American uranium supplies. You get Trump back in office, maybe he'll do it. Putin's got the PP tape all day. I swear you. All day, my Ukrainian friends were telling me they got something on him. They got something on him. They have to have something on him. This doesn't make sense. They have to have something on him. They must have some, like, him, like, it was, all of it was, did he sleep with the kid on camera or something? Did they have him, like, doing something super embarrassing? Did they have some massive financial fraud? Is there something in his tax returns that we still don't have 10 years after he came down the golden escalators? Like, it was, that's what I'm hearing all day. I don't want to engage in the speculation. For me, it's like an Occam's razor moment. Could it be that the Russians have something on them, so they're extorting him a moment like that and saying, keep it hush hush? I mean, it's possible. I don't think it's particularly likely. I think it's much more likely that he either wants them to respect him, and so he's trying to choose the pursuit of that respect over public health, or he really does just believe that these developing of public this, honestly, no, I can't think of. It's really, I'm trying. My brain is trying to find it. I think that's really the only one. I think that's the one I'm leaning towards. But remember, guys, Viktor Orban likes Trump. Viktor Orban likes Trump, so it's all okay. Everything's Gucci. Viktor Orban likes Trump. One second. Let me get Stephen Chung's beautiful response. Stephen Chung, of course, again, the same communication expert, we'll call him that, from the Trump campaign, who responded to their staff assaulting the Arlington Cemetery staff by calling them, like, mentally disabled. Anyway, let's listen.
There is an extraordinary scene where Senator Lindsey Graham is meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and
gosh, the speed is too much. Turn it down. There we go.
They say, let's call Trump, and an aide brings over a bag of 50 burner phones.
Oh my gosh.
Each one labeled for a different person. There's a Trump phone, there's a phone marked Jake Sullivan. Some people have a lot of phones.
I agree with that sentiment as a reporter.
There you
Never
go.
have too many phones. And we should note that Trump campaign communications director Stephen Chung released the following statement responding to the revelations, quote, "None of these made up stories by Bob Woodward are true and are the work of a truly demented and deranged man who suffers from a debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome. President Trump gave him absolutely no access for this trash book that either belongs in the bargain bin of the fiction section of a discount bookstore or used as toilet tissue."
So, okay, Stephen Chung's go-to, again, he's the communications expert, director, whatever you want to call him, for the Trump campaign. Every time something happens, his response is to call the people who, they engage with mentally dysfunctional in some way. When their staff scuffled with Arlington Cemetery staff, and then they took pictures in the sections they were not able to, and ended up including the graves of soldiers whose families did not want them included in their campaign ads into their campaign ads, and they recorded in it not only a campaign ad but a semi-attack ad using the footage. When that happened, what did he come out with? Oh, they're deranged, they're crazy. The crazy Arlington Cemetery staff. if the Arlington Cemetery staff is crazy, if Bob Woodward, a world-renowned journalist, award-winning journalist, is crazy, like every single person who is going to be confronting Donald Trump this election season is just a deranged person, okay? If you do not lay down on the floor while Trump wipes his shoes on your back, then you're just deranged and you're crazy. And this book is garbage because Trump didn't talk to him and give him all the access. And since Trump didn't give him the information, it has to be a lie because Trump has a deep and close relationship with the truth. Oh, also, one last thing about like the 7 calls. Some people have said this could be the 7 calls to make a deal over the war in Ukraine. And it is possible that they talked about the war in Ukraine. I would not count it out, but I do want to throw out a few things. Number one, Trump talks about a plan to end the war. He talked about a plan to overturn Obamacare for like 10 years and we still have nothing. For me, it's probably a lot more likely, if I was to guess, and again, this is speculation, that Trump doesn't have a plan, but he knows he can talk to Putin, and he knows that he's developed this relationship by choosing Putin over American public health and sending them over the COVID tests, over, sending the American people COVID tests in Illinois and other states where the government was asking for support. He's done that. He has this personal relationship with Putin, so screw a plan. Screw exact terms, screw the specifics on the ground that are going to affect the people who live there for the rest of their lives and their children and their children's children and could restart the war and extend the war if done improperly. Screw any of that. His personal relationship is going to take him a mile and a half and he's going to be able to make a deal because he can grease the palms of any of these guys necessary to get the job done. He's like a Sopranos character giving him a fucking TV set and it's like, okay, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. That's not how it's going to work. That's not how it's going to work. That's not how international politics work. You gave him the COVID tests. Now he takes Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, and all these other places anyway. Hey, we got a donation, $5 from Fast and Bulbous. What did the Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. Thank you for the $5.